The second investor I got is the 1% rule. So that 1% rule is basically if I buy them a $200,000 or they buy a $200,000 house after taxes and like maybe some renovations, they should be able to rent it out for 1% of the purchase price. So 200,000, that means they should be able to rent it out for 2,000. Makes sense? So that's like the 1% rule. But that should allocate for their taxes, and their taxes being like 2.5% because they don't have homestead on it. And then there's also called the BRRRR method, which is very popular on the West Coast. And the BRRRR method is buy, renovate, rent, refinance, and then repeat. So basically they can buy it, they renovate it to make it like more appealing, they rent it out to what they want it to do. Then they refi to get more money out, like either to refi to get cash out or refi to HELOC. And then they either buy their next property, which I know a lot of them do, or they resell that property. Just depends on what they want to do. So they have the BRRRR, the 1%, the Airbnbs. And then recently I've had quite a few investors reach out to me that they're like, I don't care if I'm hitting the 1%, I just want the appreciation areas. So I've created a document. You know, you can't steer any of your clients to where to go, but you can tell them what's going on in the areas. So let's see if I can, how do I share my screen? That's fine.
It's at the bottom. There's a green button that says share.
Oh, there's, okay. I am not like able to say like, oh, you should stay on 10th Street or you should do this. So I just have created like a document. Let me see if you can see this or not. Can you guys see that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So basically it's just like what's happening where, so that I can say like, you can choose to invest in those areas, but something's wrong. Oh, there it goes. You can choose to invest in that area, but here's what's going on. Like on the 10th Street focus, like Lily got a grant for 4.5 million, and then Joe Hogsett did Lift Indy for 3.5 million, going all the way from the start of Centerpoint all the way to Rural. Well, actually it's expanded now, it's to Sherman. But so basically I can just tell them what's going on in the area instead of like steering or directing them, so they can make the executive decision themselves. So if they're interested in just appreciation options, then I provide them with this document that I made, and it kind of goes through, like, for example, obviously with Monon 16 that's happening, there's quite a bit that they aren't seeing because the builds haven't hit the market or whatnot. So I just kind of show them like in that specific area, there's like $500,000 builds that are getting built and such. So
that's great. Thanks, Grace.
Those are kind of the mechanisms, or like the when they say COC, it's like cash on cash values.
That's great. Thank you. Joe, give us a little background on you, when you got to Platt, what your background with investors is. You're on mute. Where'd he go? Oh no.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
Good morning. Happy Monday. Yeah, so my name is Joe Menes, if I haven't met you before, and I lived in Denver, Colorado for 15 years. I'm born and raised in Indianapolis, graduated North Central, went to IU. And then in 2005, I moved out to Colorado and immediately got into real estate with an investment real estate firm that was specifically building 3-bed, 2-bath, duplex rental income properties with turnkey management in place, property management on site. They formalized, it was a great formula, brilliant idea. But the company ended up going bankrupt and the CEO ended up going to jail for 3 strikes. It was his 3rd securities violation. So we all found out he was a big time creep. But we sold about $500 million worth of real estate as a firm in a year and a half. And the trustees came in and the bankruptcy attorneys came in, they shut it down. And that formula is still today. I want to find someone with very deep pockets to recreate this formula, because they wanted to build small communities in areas that were outside of the cusp of growth. So those areas, you know, when I think about Indy, I think about Avon, Brownsburg, Greenwood. It would have been Carmel and Fishers, but Carmel and Fishers are now, you know, highly developed. But 15 years ago, 20 years ago, if you build 100 rental income units in Fishers, 3-bed, 2-baths, that would have been a pretty good investment. So once the bankruptcy took place, I met a developer through that relationship, and I joined him in 2006, middle of 2006, to start an investment real estate division. So he wanted to take a similar model and build a similar type of product. And he's a very big multi-family condominium developer in Denver. And so if you're thinking about the timeline, you know, this is getting towards the mid 2006 era. He's building condominiums. He wants to get into the investor market. I joined him, and within 4 or 5 months, condominiums just stopped selling in Denver. There was no multifamily condominiums that were selling in Denver. There was a tremendous overbuild. And so what we did is, to finish out one of his projects, we said, okay, we have 24 more units to build in one specific project. We know these 24 condominium units aren't going to sell in the regular market. So we'll sell 10% to investors and we'll sell 90% to homeowners. And that way we don't skew the ratios, because ratios are a thing with multifamily and investment properties. You want to keep the ratios within a certain range for certain properties. But to make a long story short, we did get those investor sales in the condominium building, and we were able to sell to the primary market. We sold our last unit August of 2008. And that's when shit hit the fan, if we can say shit on the Zoom calls. So everything was out of control. So by November of 2008, we bought our first property from the Denver auction. Denver has an auction system. So you go in with a stack of cashier's checks, and there's about, it just depends on the week, but there are a number of different properties that would be auctioned every week. And we started off with one, and that one made money. And that first year we did about 23, and our model was rehab and sell. So we picked up rentals along the way that showed a good return. The 1% rule is pretty standard with investors that I work with. If they're looking for a rental property, if they can buy it for $100,000 and they're renting it for $1,000, that's a pretty good deal, you know. And then you bet on equity and appreciation if you're buying in those right areas. And then by year 2, it was 40. And by year 3, it was 50. And by 2012, we did 70. And so we created a business model that was based on the fix and flip method. And he's a very sophisticated person, and he's used to the structure of looking at a budget from a building perspective and maximizing profit on what you're putting into the property versus what you can sell it for, which, you know, everybody should do. I think his background as a developer really helps you analyze the properties and figure out what you need to put into it and what you can sell for it. And development came back in Denver. So his focus was on building apartment projects at this point, because condominiums were still difficult because of builder lawsuits. And I won't get into any of that, but builders started suing HOAs. And pretty much if you were a builder in Denver planning to build a condominium building, you were building in your cost to get sued on it as well. So it just, nobody wanted to deal with that.
That sounds horrific.
It was terrible. I mean, I saw him, he went through the gauntlet, but he's fine. He
Yeah.
he's okay. But yeah, it was a big strain and really just weird because it was they didn't need to do it. It was lawyers getting rich by having the HOAs sue their developer, and it was the lawyers making all the money. But I digress. And so then we had a combination of building in the company and then still doing this high volume fix and flip. I moved back to Indy in 2018. So for 13 years, I worked with him and did that. And I don't know what the exact numbers are, but very high volume rehabs during that time. And then I was the listing agent for him. So I would help with the design of the project, and then I would list the properties. So I would acquire them, manage the projects, design them, and then list them. And when I moved back to Indianapolis, I wanted to take a year off of real estate, and I wanted to work with kids. And I kind of wanted to get out of the not the rat race, but it was 70-hour work weeks, and it was 24 people to manage, and it was sleepless nights a lot of the time. And I needed a break. And so I wanted to work with kids, and I got involved with a charter school in town, Crystal House Academy. And I worked with an independent investor who I had also formed a relationship with over that time. And I told him I was in Indianapolis, and he said, well, let's sell my Colorado properties and invest in Indianapolis. And I was like, yeah, let's do that. Just not even planning on it. And so within 7 or 8 months, he bought 4. And so I was teaching and then just kind of still doing real estate on the side. And in October, I transferred my license from Colorado. It's reciprocal. So I just had to take the state exam. For anybody who asks you guys, make sure they find out if it's reciprocal and don't do the whole thing over again, because I had to take an hour state exam instead of doing the whole 90 hours again. So if you know of anybody moving to Indianapolis from somewhere else with a license, make sure they know that, because that saved me a lot of time. And I have a good friend who's been with Tucker forever, and that just didn't feel right for me. And Megan Sullivan, I had worked with at ATA, and Platt kept on popping up. Like, I don't know, how when you start thinking about things and then you hear somebody else talk about it, or you see something just kind of randomly. So I was interested in Platt and had a talk with Megan, and then had a talk with Rosie. Actually, kind of Rosie stepped in and did all the introduction and onboarding and everything with Michelle. And so that year of school helped me clear my mind, decide that this is what I love. This is the type of business that I want to be involved in. So I hung my license. I started working with an out-of-state buyer as well, who they buy rental properties, wholesale properties, and buy and fix and flip properties. So then I jumped all in again, starting in October, and we've been pretty busy, and things are going pretty well. It's an interesting time, and it's kind of a time of adapting and learning. But I think it's a phenomenal time to be involved in investment real estate. And I think that agents think about that type of niche, or even including that in their first-time home buyer or their listing business model. I think a lot of people are going to be thinking about where they want to put their money after something like this, and after something like going through the Great Recession as well. Because real estate's tangible. You can touch it, you can walk it, and if you're buying affordable properties, most likely those are going to be the properties that stay occupied because they're affordable. I think the higher end could seriously see some adjustments, but that's my story. I think that's about what I have to share for that aspect of it.
That's perfect. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Rex Rooney, on to you, sir. Give us your background. How'd you get to Platt? I've heard you're an owner or something. How does that work? You're on mute. Lord help. Okay, I'm unmuting you.
And sweep up the office and stuff. which has been easier for the last 60 days. Yeah, I had a natural career progression from tech and venture capital to social services fundraising to realtor. I started my career actually with Sony Music back in '99. Realized pretty quickly that the Fortune 500 arena was not my thing, that I wanted something with a more of an entrepreneurial bent, and was approached at that time by through a mutual contact, an economist out of UC Berkeley and an economist out of IU's Kelley School, and then a local psychologist who had developed some new economic theory at the time around e-commerce. And they were, it was a business method patent and it was getting traction. They had two problems. One was they didn't want to leave their very lucrative jobs to build a company around this technology, and two, they couldn't get meetings with the media companies, which at the time Napster was kind of wrapping up in the courts, and the big question in media was, what are we going to do with this unknown of the digital space, and back then peer-to-peer networks and on and on. So they approached me because at 21 years old, my price point was right, and I didn't really have anything to lose. And they said, look, we'll throw a little bit of money behind this, and if you can go get some pilots done with some of the record labels or others, we'll put some more money into it, and you can have a shot at building a company around this. And so the next week I was sitting on Sunset Boulevard with a record exec from EMI Capitol Records, and talking about, interesting enough, Nash equilibrium theory, if you've ever seen A Beautiful Mind, wondering if anybody knew that I got a C in microeconomics. But it took off. It took off like wildfire, and had the opportunity, to do a lot of work within content being developed from the physical space into digital, and the price mix around that, but then really transitioned into a much more lucrative space, which was concert touring and then professional sports, where StubHub was really gaining traction and presenting this concern for concert promoters and venue owners around how they had one static price, and all of a sudden you had millions of people who could change the pricing of their product just sold through a different market. So spent the majority of my 10 years in that arena traveling around the top 30 urban markets in the US and a little in the EU. Moved that company to Indy in 2002, and we just kept seeing in every city we were in, real estate was always tied to really the I'd say the endurance or the durability of whatever product, whatever ticket they were selling, right? So the best example I've got, within, the Midwest is Chicago. If you think of the United Center, if you've ever been to see a Blackhawks or a Bulls game there, when those teams are good, ticket sales are great, corporate sponsorships are great, the packages are selling, ad revenue's coming in, everybody is happy. When those teams are bad, you can hear the audible vacuum of funds being removed from the ownership, and that's because the economy around the United Center sucks. It is not built for an entertainment experience. You don't go for beers and a meal before or after a game. It is a singular focus, within that locale. Now, on the other side of that coin in Chicago, you have Wrigleyville, and the Cubbies can be out of the race in June, and they're going to sell out. Sponsorship's going to be great. Your packages and corporate partnerships are going to scream. It is a diversified economy of sport and entertainment, where residential is just enduring. And what I realized within that is that in every city you have neighborhoods that are like the United Center that just are not economically diversified enough to endure, and do not provide a stickiness that keeps residents there and keeps people investing in it, so that it can really ride through the dips in the market better than most, and take advantage of the rises better than most. And you also have these others that are. They have a commercial center. They have good access to downtown. They have interstate access. They have walkability. They have a diversified community. Interestingly enough, communities tend to homogenize either way. When you have a diversification within that community, socioeconomically, demographically, the more diverse that community is, the more enduring and better it tends to thrive, which is not necessarily in line with the way we always think. So I saw that and thought, I think with where Indy is, and I kind of did the overlay with Indianapolis being at this time in 2005, let's look at these urban markets within the U.S. and try to find where the most common, overlay is within the last maybe 50 years. And the closest matchup was Austin, Texas in the late 80s. Geographically, no ocean, no mountains. You had a good logistics center. You had good interstate access. You had good commercial and freight air. You had a tech scene that was just up and coming, similar to Indy. Back then, Dell, HP, Hewlett Packard, Texas Instruments were all, the world was going from mainframe computers to personal computers. And the capital markets were just starting to look, as far as tech's concerned, outside of the West Coast and Silicon Valley and the East Coast and Lower Manhattan and Silicon Alley, and migrate to places like Austin, Texas. So all of a sudden the capital markets came in, and you had this flashpoint where the right things came together in Austin, Texas. Then from about the early mid 90s to today has been on a pretty darn good 25-year rip. Well, I looked at Indianapolis and said, okay, we aren't in the 90s yet, but we're in the 80s. And so that's the time to acquire real estate. And I started to look because I knew the Wrigleyvilles within cities have a few common key points at that, in development. One, they had a commercial center. Two, they actually had a certain higher level of rental demand to owner occupant mix, which meant that I had a demographic that wanted to rent at a critical mass that could actually be redeveloped quicker because the turnover is quicker. I needed good access to the interstate and good access to the city. I needed that commercial center because people had to be able to walk to get what they needed. And the neighborhood at that time that checked all those boxes best was Fountain Square within my price point. I needed to be able to buy properties for under $100,000. So I bought my first one was a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath property. I bought it for like 32 grand, rented it, put about, $2,500 and like a month of nights and weekends into it. Rented it out, for $700. And thought, that was pretty awful doing it, but it's pretty great now on the backside of it. And then, after that, bought a little, one bedroom, one bath duplex. And, for the first couple of years, it was just kind of that. I bought, maybe 2 to 3 properties a year while I was doing my main gig. And then we sold that tech company in 2011. And I realized I had 2 big problems if I wanted to continue to, stay in Indy. One, the tech scene wasn't developed the way that it was now. So if I wanted to continue my trajectory there, I'd have to move to a coast. And 2, while I understood the economics of, real estate development and community development, I did not understand the relational realities and the metrics around being able to sustainably impact a local economy in relevant ways. So my wife and I started to look for opportunities to immerse ourselves within organizations who had proven to do that well for at least 20 years. And my wife ended up, she was teaching at Carmel at the time. She ended up leaving that and teaching over at the Oaks Brookside as that campus was launching. And I landed heading up the fundraising department at Shepherd Community Center over just east of Sherman and Washington. And it was really hard and it didn't pay well, but it was also really good. Probably the most impactful 4 years as far as understanding different mentalities within a city, different lenses around generational poverty, situational poverty, the motives and moves in the politics around how this city develops. And that helped me be better at investing in real estate on the side hustle. And as that side business developed, by 2014, it needed full-time attention. And I came out of the nonprofit arena, certainly realizing that I'm better in the for-profit than the nonprofit, and more motivated by it. And had known Mark for a few years prior, and sat down with him and he said, yeah, you should do that and hang your license here. And I thought, okay, I'll do that, and hopped out. And really never intended to help transact real estate for other people, but saw a need where we were able to help people navigate the realities of this city, which can be harrowing, and transacting real estate and knowing how to navigate different hooks and snags, and saw that we were able to actually help people build wealth who didn't save enough for retirement or wanted a different way outside of your standard 401k or IRA to build their net worth. And so we started to really focus on replicating that out in the back half of 2016, and it's gotten us here.
That's great. Thanks, Rex. Guys, I'm going to dive into some questions for these folks, but if you guys have anything you want to add, just drop it in the chat, or I'll leave some space at the end for you guys to unmute yourself and ask them yourself. So I'm going to let whichever of you choose who wants to answer this first, but you guys have both worked with investor clients and like normal residential clients. Can you tell us what are the differences between working with those different sets of clients? What do agents need to be most aware of when working with investors rather than residential clients? Who's going first?
I'll give a brief breakdown of kind of how I feel about it. I feel like working with investors, as long as the numbers and the end game, the exit strategy, and the fundamentals are there. For Rex put it perfectly, location, is it in those areas of highway access? Is it in the areas of neighborhood development and community development? Is the rental income going to support the cost and provide cash flow? That's what an investor wants to know. So there's not a lot of personal engagement as far as I'm going to make this my forever house. This is my dream house. So it's kind of like if the numbers work, then it works for the investor. And if somebody's good at evaluating numbers and evaluating location and having that foresight, then the investor's happy, and most likely that's going to be a continued relationship that only grows. In my experience working with the end buyer or a lister, there's at times a lot more emotional energy invested with that process, and from my experience. So with an investor, I can say, here's the pro forma, here's the property, here are the highlights about it, here's what we might have to consider as far as being prepared for. And it's a business decision. And so a lot of the personal energy is taken out of it. Working with a listing agent or a buyer, you really have to be invested in that person's psychological situation as well, and their emotional attachment of what it's going to be for them to find that house that they want to live in. And if they're selling, that is a very stressful situation. Those people want to maximize that equity in the properties they've purchased. And so for me, the emotional energy that's involved with the home buyer is different than the investor.
Yeah, that's so great. Chris, do you have anything to add there?
I think you have to hustle. Like, you have to hustle your ass off for investors, because you don't really have time most of the time. Like, for example, I have one from Israel who messages me at 2 in the morning, and that's just what I get. I wake up and I roll over and I look at the phone and find out that that one already had the 7, 8, or 9 offers on the table. So you have to be able to jump out of bed in the morning. And I personally do not feel comfortable buying any type of house for an investor that I don't put my eyes on. Some people do sight unseen, looks like a good area, ABC area, but I'm not somebody that way. So I always have to at least go drive by the house if I can't get into it, even if it's a wholesaler. But for investors, you just have to hustle. And I was talking to Josh Newman one time, who was working with an investor for the first time. And I was just quizzing him one day, and I was like, what rent do you get in that area? And he was like, I don't know. I don't often look at rents. And I was like, you have to know the rent in certain areas in order to like be able to speak truthfully to an investor. Because if you don't know the rent, then they don't really care. Kind of like what Joe said, you just have to know the numbers like the back of your hand. Now, home buyers, first-time home buyers, any kind of home buyers, those are just fun. I think those are like a good enjoyment and like a breath of fresh air for like somebody that's like, I love this house, and you're so excited that they love this house, because this investor is like, I don't care if we lose this deal. And I'm like, oh, I just worked like 3 hours on trying to get this all squared away, and you could care less if we lose this. Whereas a home buyer is like, oh my God, did we get it? And like so excited.
Yeah, that's so good. Rex?
Actually, I was just gonna speak to Natalie's question there. Natalie, that's a really good question, and my answer might be a little frustrating. It honestly is up to that investor, right? Because if we're talking long term, save a handful of areas over the next 10 years, your capital is going to appreciate. In Indianapolis in general, this is the cheapest real estate's going to be for a long time, probably within our lifetimes, hopefully. So, you know, what I would say there is, if you have someone who says, you know, and I have clients, they're like, hey, we want to buy in Fountain Square, right? And I'm like, that's great. You have to set your expectation accordingly, because you are competing with a different market. I could take those same funds into Twin Air or Christian Park and generate, you know, 3 times plus the return that you're going to get in Fountain Square right now for most of what's coming up, you know, and out of that space. So, you know, I think ultimately, if it is long-term capital, you can always find ways to lose money in real estate, but, you know, with your experience and your lens, you know, I mean, I think it depends on where is that neighborhood within the appreciation cycle, because if it is on the verge of a quantum shift, right? If it is, getting something like, Twin Air has the Justice Campus coming in, and in 1 year, in Chandler, 2 years, you're going to have thousands of people who weren't there before spending the best hours of their day in that neighborhood. Well, the cap rate that I'm going to look at there is going to be so much less than if we're looking in, say, a Broad Ripple typically. I think the best ways to learn about those appreciation areas, read the IBJ, meet with the community leaders, meet with the neighborhood associations, read the emails that are coming out from the merchant associations in different neighborhoods. A lot of my work is honestly staying connected with, the different communities in the city about, where is the money going that can't lose. And, to that end, an example is, guys, there's not enough being made in the press right now about the fact that the Holmans had, the Brickyard for 50 is great. They came in, they brought a global, icon venue in sports back from the brink, but that was the only thing they had in racing. And what has just happened is an 82-year-old billionaire who built his fortune within racing and the diversified peripheral industries around it has just purchased it and is not investing in that venue for a good 30-year run. Roger Penske is investing for his legacy. An 82-year-old has walked every single bathroom in that place. He is investing in that racetrack, and he is investing in the community around it. And that is money that does not lose. So those are the things that I look at, follow those funds. Now, when you look at Waterside is another example. Waterside is 108 acres just across the White River, next to downtown. And the challenge with that is my son is banging on the window of my office and knocking to say hi. Hi, bud. How you doing? Good to see you. He's really jumpy. So Waterside, you got 108 acres that Ambrose bought for $3 million. All right. To try to get Amazon. And then if they couldn't make it work, try to parlay into something else. But $3 million for 108 acres, that close to the center of downtown, he has nothing to lose. And it is easy for him to walk away from that. That is money that can lose all day long, because the lose is still a friggin' good win. So that is where I look at, I read a lot. I have a goal. My one point of accountability that my head of operations holds me to every week, and I have to report it to her, is a minimum of 10 meetings a week, plugging in and finding out what's happening, what are people striving for, what's going on, and a stretch goal of 20 to stay plugged into this community and try to find ways of uncovering opportunity to help people where they're going. And it always ties back to real estate, and it always helps me understand where's the diversified investment going that doesn't lose.
That's great, Rex. Thanks. Jenny asked a question: what are some favorite strategies to procure off-market properties? Joe or Chris, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I'll just tell you how we procure our off-market properties, because that's 99% of where we do get our properties. And I don't want to bum anybody out, but this is the reality of life and acquiring things at a discount, right? But we get in contact with people who are going through divorce, probate. We know that they could be losing the house, or we know that the house was an inheritance. We know that maybe they're underwater for some reason, one or the other. They contact us, so it's never us contacting them as far as making a phone call before they call in and say, we're interested in you purchasing our property. But you can find that through county records. You can find that through mailing lists. There are companies that specialize in mailing lists that will send out to properties direct mailers that say, you guys have all seen it, we'll buy your house cash, that type of thing. Some of those companies are very legit and some of them aren't. but we find our properties through people that are usually in distress situations that need to sell, be it divorce, death, estate, or someone that doesn't feel comfortable selling it on the regular market because of the condition of the house. It's not a market ready house. You don't list these properties on the MLS and generally have them sell. They need work, they need love, they need money put into them and invested into them. And a lot of these people don't have that money, so they just want to sell it and move on. So that's the majority of the way that we find off market properties, because if the property is ready for the market and if the property can sell on the market, the MLS is the best way to sell it. But you can't sell every property on the MLS. And not all properties are going to qualify for mortgages from somebody that wants to even buy them on the MLS. So that's going to be a cash buying investor. But probate, divorce, death, unfortunately, is the way we acquire a lot of our properties. There's someone in a distressed place or a distressed situation. And then lastly, people who aren't comfortable with open houses or aren't comfortable showing their house or have a social anxiety disorder and they're a recluse and they don't even want to communicate with the outside world at all. We just sold a property in Carmel and I worked with a guy for 3 weeks and he met me for the first time. He didn't get out of the car. He had major social anxiety. He ended up opening up about this to me from the time that I started to get to know him over this 3-week period. All of our transactions, I would drop the paperwork on the porch. He would get it after I left, and I would come back and pick up the paperwork. It would drive him crazy to sell this house on the primary market, and this man would be living in fear every single day. So for him, it was a godsend to be. This wasn't a distress situation. His family left him a whole bunch of inheritance, but mentally he could not go to that place to get it listed and think about dealing with people coming in and out. It just scared him to death. So he wanted to sell it and walk away. And so those are most of the situations that I see for off market.
Great, thanks. Chris, anything you would add? You could say no, it's totally fine. You're muted, but it feels like you want to pass. I'm unmuting you because we can't hear you.
There you go. Sorry, I couldn't scroll over as fast. I am very much somebody that is the most nosy person in the world. I actually just I'm an avid believer of supporting where I live. So if things are happening to houses, I'll find them. I'll just go knock on their door. Say like, what are you doing to your house? Like, I see it's kind of hard with COVID, but I see you have moving boxes or you're redoing your roof. Like, and then just kind of figure out from there. I know like there's like 7 or 8 off the market properties in Holy Cross because that's where I live. So I'll take a lot of first time home buyers and stuff like that to those areas, but they're not investor properties. But in summary, how I get mine, besides wholesalers, which I'm not a huge fan of, I just am a nosy person.
Great, thank you. Okay, can you guys tell me like what problems you have working with investors? Like what feels hard about working with them? Rex, I'm gonna call on you first.
Sure. To start off, I think first and foremost, individuals who are on a bent, they take more than the relationship is warranted. Like there is a time at which, whether it's an owner occupant or an investor, it's better not to have them as a client. And I would encourage you in those situations where you see them transactionalizing you, right, and burning up you and grinding you down. Anybody that is not just generally, healthy to engage with. When you're starting out, it is hard to cut those clients loose. But if you quantify what they're actually taking from you, it's way more than what you're typically going to see in a monetary commission. On the other end, you know, you have the opportunity to focus your time and attention and expertise and relationships on clients that understand your value. You can grow to a place of tremendous impact. So I think, you know, what's hard sometimes is realizing, you know what, I've got an investor I can make some money with, and they want to buy a fair number of properties, but they're actually holding me back. And that's really tough. The brass tacks on some of the others. I think you really have to work hard with investors, especially new investors, to set expectations appropriately. You have to work to not overwhelm them and to make it simple. And look, something's going to go wrong. Probably a lot of some things are going to go wrong. And often those investors have better things to do with the majority of their day. So you have to find a way to solve problems that you typically wouldn't and find them in ways that they scale. And that can be really, really hard. But, you know, some of the most difficult realities around my investor clients that I, you know, in the past have been, you know what, a situation came up. You know, they're frustrated that, you know, that it happened. They just didn't have the time in the day to navigate that. It deviates from their expectations. We didn't set those appropriately. And, you know, now we, you know, you know, boy, we had this issue and we just didn't do a great job of hopping right on that and solving it for them. And I think, you know, owning that and making sure that they are taken care of and not getting blown up by, and, you know, death by paper cut from all these little calls and opportunities. That is a big difference. You know, especially when that's someone who's looking to buy multiple properties a year, you really got to be on it and making sure that they're covered. But if they can sit back and collect checks and know that you've got it and you're taking care of them, that is a relationship that can often scale really, really well in a short amount of time.
That's great. Rex, I don't know if you saw Chris's note. Can you provide an example of COC, cash on cash, I'm guessing, so that people can understand that?
Yeah, I mean, so effectively, if I've got, you know, someone who's looking, you know, to get a, you know, 1% cash on cash, I think the thing you want to be clear with, you want to make sure is that you're looking at it the same way they are. You know, because some people will, oh, you know, it's renting, you know, bought it for 100,000, it's renting for 1,000. I'm making that 1%, and that's true on the revenue side. But then, you know, if they're servicing that, they're going to have debt that's playing in there. They're going to have, you know, certainly going to have taxes. They're going to have insurance. They are probably going to have management. They're going to have, you know, vacancy, repairs, maintenance, and so, you know, if you get through all that and now you're looking at, okay, you bought this property for 100,000, but you financed it. So, you know, let's say it's a single family, you brought 20% down, you really, you know, invested not 100,000, but 20,000. All right. And that property is renting out at that 1,000. Is your profit out of that 1,000 getting you to $200 a month? You know, are you there? If you're there, you're 1%. Cash on cash, great. And the power of that is that you can buy $100,000 home for cash, which is fine. You're going to make, you know, good cash flow, but you can take that same 100,000 and buy 5. All right. And they'll cash flow month to month about the same. Of course, you have some higher breakage costs and whatnot, but 5 houses at 100,000 that appreciate to 150 over the next 5 years is a lot better than 1 house that appreciates from 100 to 150 over 1 year. So that's maybe a little bit more in the weeds of cash on cash into, you know, extending your investor's capital. But that cash on cash is a big, big deal.
Thanks, Rex. Okay, guys, this is your chance. If you want to unmute yourself and ask any questions, seize the moment, or you can drop them into the chat. I'm going to pause for like 10 seconds. If no one says anything, I'm going to move on. Okay, nothing. Cool. Thanks. Okay, guys, last question for you. Any final tips that you would give to agents who are maybe working their very first deal with investors? What would you tell them? Chris, we're going to start with you.
I think you have to align your expectations with them. Every time I get a new investor, I try to get them on the phone to understand what their goals are, because as Rex kind of alluded to earlier, he said everyone has a different cash on cash way of doing their calculations. So even though somebody might say, I want 10% cash on cash or whatever, it might be different on how they attribute that. Maybe they don't include their taxes, maybe they do, those types of things. So understanding exactly what their calculations are. So I ask them specifically, give me your calculation. Well, I use this website. Okay, well then fine, send me the website. If I use this, then XYZ. So you really just have to make sure you understand what their goals are. And then I have a templated email that I send out, but essentially I try to show them my work ethic within the first 3 days of getting them as a new investor. So for example, I just go and video a property that may be a little bit outside of their cash on cash, so that they can see like, hey, I am willing to work with you, but this is what you're going to get in the Indy area. Or if they're like, hey, what about this house? And then there's like 7 offers on the table and they take 4 or 5 hours to respond. I use that as a prime example, because I'm like, you have to move fast in Indy. So I think if you are working with the investor for the first time, you really just have to prove yourself, because just like a house is to them, like they have no emotional ties. I feel like they really don't necessarily have emotional ties to realtors either. And you'll find that out as well.
Thanks, Chris. Joe, anything to add?
Yeah, aligning expectations and preparing them that not everything is going to go exactly to plan. You know, real estate, you're always going to have unexpecteds, and if things get a little out of control, then that's usually a pretty good case scenario. You know, I've kept it very simple with new clients, or when I first started out, the projects needed cosmetic work, the nuts and bolts, the bones, so to speak, were good. So I didn't take on very large projects until I was very experienced. So if someone's just getting into this, pick a product that's maybe relatively new, maybe just needs a cosmetic remodel, and put your numbers together and know that there's going to be unexpecteds, but try to minimize that risk.
That's great. Thanks, Joe. Rex, final parting wisdom?
I would say educate yourself in machine gun questions, you know, back into the brokerage. See, you know, get your hands on some nightmare inspections for investment properties. And if you don't recognize the term, ask. All right. What's knob and tube? What's galvanized pipe? What's hydrostatic pressure causing bowing in the foundation? What are powder post beetles? Is termite damage bad? Because honestly, sometimes termite damage is bad. Sometimes termite damage is okay. You know, what's a sewer lateral? What's a sewer lateral clean out? What's an S-trap? You know, ask those questions so that you can serve your client well. Learn to identify these things in a house. You know, when I was first getting into this, I would have an inspection just to learn from the inspector. You know, and I would show up and I'd walk through and I'd probably annoy the crap out of them. It's like, what do you see in there? What are you looking? Why are you flying? You know, you're showing your flashlight right up there. What's that? That's a sill plate. Oh, great. Okay. What about that over there? And just, that is the best way to learn. Get your eyes on it so you know to find it, so you know what it looks like. And if you get to the point, I mean, ultimately, you know, if you're able to proactively work with an investor and say, you know, I know what you're looking for. I'm not sending you every option, you know, under the sun to what about this one? What about this one? What about, I've been out to these. I think they're good. I've run the cash flow on them. I've been through the houses. It needs this work. I think it's going to cost this amount of money. Here you go. That's what they want. They have 1,000 other things screaming at them during the best hours of their day. And if you are able to bring them good opportunities and do the legwork and make it easy for them, they will work with you and they will grow with you, and you will build them a large portfolio to the degree they want it. You'll have the ability to build them a large portfolio that works for both. My largest client, I was just running the numbers. Last year, I transacted about 5.3 million worth of volume for them and about $160,000 worth of commission. But that is largely from just getting out and like pounding it for 15 years and knowing what we're looking at.
That's so good. Thanks, Rex. Okay, everyone, thanks for coming. I know we're a couple minutes over, but let me give you a quick rundown of this week, what we'll be looking at. Tomorrow, we're joined by Matt Davis of Caliber Home Loans. He is walking us through what lending is currently looking like and will continue to look like in the future with coronavirus. On Wednesday, we are joined with a Grand Slam team: Mark Nottingham, Shanda Johnson, Kelly Lavengood. Don't tell her I got her name wrong. And they are going to be teaching us how to price a house. I think it's going to be a really good one. Mark your calendars for that one. We scheduled an extra half an hour just in case it runs over. And then last but certainly not least, Crystal White is going to be teaching us how to stay a boss. I cannot wait for that one. So hope you can join us. Have a good one.
Thanks. Thanks, Rosie.